Welcome to the channel Mirelle Tales. Before we start, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, let's get into today's story.
My mother sold me to a disabled man. On our wedding night, he suddenly stood up and said in a cold voice, "Get dressed. There's a secret I have to tell you." It was late March on the outskirts of Queens, the air so humid that the old linoleum floors in our apartment always felt tacky. A weak breeze stirred the leaves of the struggling maple tree in the small backyard, doing little to cut the chill inside. It wasn't the weather. It was a cold that seeped out from the soul. Standing over the stove that day, stirring a thin chicken broth for my mother, I felt like my life had been backed into a corner with not even half a step of room left to retreat. My name is Chloe. I'm 25. I'm not brilliant or special, just a girl working an office job for a small electrical supply distributor near the industrial park, earning a steady paycheck that was just enough to cover rent, utilities, groceries, and mom's prescriptions, and then it was gone. My mother Eleanor wasn't my birth mother. She'd found me when I was just a baby, a nameless infant left at a shelter, and raised me on a string of odd jobs, from stocking shelves at the corner bodega to doing mending and alterations for people in the neighborhood. She always said she hadn't been blessed with much in life, that I was the one gift the heavens had accidentally dropped in her lap. But when heaven gives you something, it seems you don't get to choose the terms. For the last few years, my mother's heart had been failing. At first, it was just bouts of fatigue, a shortness of breath that would pass. Then came the daily medications. Then, at the beginning of the year, doctors found a lesion on her lung. During our last visit, the oncologist, a man with weary eyes behind thick glasses, looked at me for a long time. His voice was slow, each word a stone pressing down on my chest. "You should start her on the aggressive treatment plan as soon as possible. If you wait even with money, it might be too late." I managed a smile that tasted like ash. Money? Where would I get that kind of money? I didn't dare ask the doctor. I only asked myself, huddled in the back of an Uber, clutching the bag of prescriptions, the city wind whipping against my face. My bank account had a little over $6,000 in it. $6,000. In an age where a head of lettuce costs a fortune, who could that possibly save? My mother sat on her old wooden bed, pushed against the window, her back propped against the wall, a hand pressed to her chest whenever she'd coughed. She had grown so thin that her wrist was just a knot of bone under translucent skin. Yet whenever I came home late from work, she'd force a smile. "Did you eat, honey? I saved you some of the soup." Hearing those words, I often wanted to run out to the rusty fire escape and just cry. They say an old mother's life hangs by a thread. She's there, but you live with the constant fear that the slightest breeze could be enough to snap it. My greatest fear was being jolted awake in the dead of night by the sound of her racking cough from the other room, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. It was a fear no one could see, but it eroded you day by day. That afternoon, as I brought her a bowl of broth, she looked at me for a long, long time. Her gaze was different. It wasn't just love, not just exhaustion. It was the look of someone holding a truth so heavy that speaking it was as painful as keeping it silent. She put her water glass down, her voice raspy. "Chloe, there's something I need to tell you." I pulled a chair close. "What is it, Mom? Are you feeling worse? I can take tomorrow off and we can go back to the hospital." She shook her head, her frail, cool hand finding mine. "It's not about medicine, Chloe. It's about your whole life." I froze. In our house, whenever she started a sentence like that, it was never good news. She took a difficult breath. "Someone came to see me today. They want to ask for your hand in marriage." I burst out laughing, thinking the fever was making her delirious. "Who, Mom? Are you kidding me?" She didn't smile. She looked down at the frayed edge of her quilt, her voice dropping lower. "It's the Croft family, from the Upper East Side." I was stunned into silence for several seconds. That name was legendary in New York. The Crofts were fabulously wealthy real estate, a chain of high-end grocery stores, stocks and everything. People like them, and people like me, were on opposite sides of the East River. We could barely even see each other clearly, let alone meet. I blurted out, "You must have misheard, Mom." Or they were asking about someone else with the same name. "No, they were asking for you." I set the bowl down hard on the nightstand, the spoon clattering with a dry, sharp sound. A family like that asking for me, who am I? What could I possibly have that would make them come all the way to this apartment? My mother was quiet for a moment. "They're asking for their younger son, Julian." I knew the name not from any personal acquaintance but because the gossip columns had been merciless. Julian Croft, the second son of the Croft dynasty, had been in a terrible car accident a few years ago that left him in a wheelchair. Rumor had it the accident had left him incomplete as a man. That was why for years there had been no talk of marriage. Whenever the old women gossiping at the laundromat mentioned him, their words were a mix of pity and morbid curiosity, as if speaking of a priceless vase with a chip in it. I looked at my mother, a lump forming in my throat. "You're telling me you want me to marry him?" She squeezed my hand. "They promised to cover all of my medical expenses. The hospital bills, the medication, the entire upcoming course of treatment." And there it was. I sat in stunned silence. Outside, water dripped from the rusty air conditioner onto the pavement below a rhythmic, lonely sound. Inside, there was only the hum of the old box fan and my mother's labored breathing. It turned out that in this world, sometimes no one needed to force you. They just had to toss a lifeline for your loved ones in front of you, and you'd know exactly where you had to step. But my heart ached, as if it were being wrung out. "Mom," my voice was strained, "I'm your daughter, not something to be traded." She suddenly turned her face away, and I saw the corner of her eye redden. I know that, and I still told you. I have no other choice, Chloe." Her words were soft, but they cut like a knife. I stood up abruptly and went to the window, needing air. The sky was darkening gray clouds hanging low over the neighboring rooftops. The smell of damp earth from the potted plants, exhaust fumes and clothes that never fully dried in the humidity blended together, making my chest feel tight. I wanted to be angry at her, but then I looked back at her small, huddled form on the bed, and the anger dissipated before it could even form. How could you be angry at someone who struggled for every breath? After a while, I went back to her side, my voice softer. "Why me? A family like theirs could have anyone they want. Someone from their own world." My mother answered very slowly. "They said Julian needs a wife who is gentle, discreet, and unassuming." I couldn't believe it. The reason was too perfect, so perfect it was absurd. Were they choosing a wife like they were screening a resume for a personal assistant? But I looked at my mother's pale face, remembered the hospital admission forms tucked in my desk drawer, and the meager number in my bank account. My heart sank. It was true what they said, desperation stifles reason. When you're cornered, you even have to learn to swallow your pride. My mother spoke again, her words clear and deliberate this time. "I'm not forcing you, Chloe, but if you agree, I have a chance. If you don't, I won't blame you." She paused, a coughing fit seizing her, bending her double. I rushed to pat her back to give her water. After the cough passed, her lips were pale. I'm afraid I don't have much time left." I went numb. Her words were a stone dropped into the pit of my stomach where it sank and settled cold and heavy. I sat with her for a long time, neither of us speaking. Outside, the sky turned to dusk. The yellow light from the single bulb on the ceiling cast shadows on her face, making the lines around her eyes seem deeper. For the first time, I saw that my mother was truly old, so old and fragile that a strong gust of wind might carry her away. I took her hand. "If I agree, you'll go through with the treatment properly. No more hiding how you feel." Her eyes trembled. "Yes, and you won't hide your symptoms from me anymore." She nodded, a hot tear falling onto the back of my hand. I don't know how long I sat there. I only remember that finally, when the lights had come on in our apartment and in the windows across the street, I heard my own voice thin but clear. "I agree." After I said it, I felt something inside me crack very softly. It wasn't because I believed this was the start of a beautiful life, but because I understood that from that moment on, my life had turned down a different path, a path I had to walk whether I wanted to or not. After the night, I agreed our little apartment remained the same. The same tacky linoleum floors, the same scent of menthol rub by the bed, the same old fan creaking like an old man turning in his sleep, only my heart had changed. It was heavy, as if someone had placed a stone on it. It was heavy when I went to work during the day, and even heavier when I lay down at night. The next morning, I woke up early to make oatmeal for Mom. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, a thin, pilled sweater draped over her shoulders. Seeing me bustling in the small kitchen, she called out softly, "Chloe." I turned. "How are you feeling, Mom?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at me with an expression of guilt. That look made me incredibly uncomfortable. I would rather have her yell at me than look at me like she was indebted to me. I brought the bowl of oatmeal to her. "Eat, Mom. I've put your pills out." She held the spoon, but didn't eat. "You were very angry with me last night, weren't you?" I sat down on a low stool and let out a long breath. "I'm not angry at you, Mom. I'm angry at our situation. I softened my tone. I've already agreed, so I won't go back on my word. It's just, my heart hasn't caught up yet. She looked down, her eyes red-rimmed. Man proposes, God disposes. I never wanted to push you into this. I gave a bitter smile. But we're in it now. From that day on, my mother changed. She no longer hemmed and hawed about her medication or waved away my suggestions about the hospital. Instead, she became strangely eager about the wedding arrangements. In the morning, she'd mention it. In the afternoon, she'd ask if the Crofts had been in touch. I'd walk in the door from work, and before I could even set my bag down, I'd hear, "Did they call you? Do you need to get your good dress altered? Maybe we should go buy you a new pair of shoes tomorrow." At first, I thought she was just happy about having the money for her treatment, but the more I watched her, the more I felt something was off. Her eagerness wasn't that of someone looking forward to an opportunity, but of someone trying to rush things forward before something could change. One day, while I was folding laundry, I asked her directly, "Mom, why did the Croft family choose me?" There was sewing a button on an old blouse, and her hand paused for a fraction of a second. "I told you. They said Julian needed someone gentle." "You said that yesterday," I said, looking up at her. "Do you think I'm that naive?" She avoided my eyes. "They told me so, I'm telling you. How would I know more? A family as rich as theirs choosing a wife for their son as if they're picking out vegetables at the market. They just see someone who looks right and take her home. Mom, tell me the truth. What else are you hiding from me?" She fell silent, only a dry cough escaping her throat. I looked at her thin, drawn face, my heart a mix of frustration and pity. They say a child who surpasses their parents brings fortune to the family. All I wanted was to be a little stronger than my mother, strong enough to carry her burdens, but even now I was failing. I softened, handing her a glass of water. "I'm not asking to argue with you. I just want to know what I'm walking into." She took a sip and answered very slowly. "Sometimes knowing things early doesn't make them any less painful. Just understand that they need a quiet marriage, and I need the money to save my life. Both sides have their calculations." A chill went down my spine. So it was true. I was just the person chosen to fit their equation. She took my hand, her voice trembling. "But I chose this thinking of you, too. They may be cold, they may be secretive, but they aren't scoundrels off the street. At least there you won't have to worry about putting food on the table." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound sour even to my own ears. A girl whose marriage prospects are weighed between hospital bills and grocery money. We've really hit rock bottom, haven't we, Mom? The words hung between us, and we both fell silent. At work, I tried to bury myself in paperwork, to forget about the impending wedding. But the more I tried to forget, the more I remembered. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped. During lunch, the other women in the office chattered about designer bags and new nail polish. One showed off a watch her boyfriend had bought her. Another talked about house hunting over the weekend. I sat there eating my cold lunch from a container, feeling like I was an outsider, looking in on other people's lives. After work, I stopped by the pharmacy and then the market for some fish and vegetables. As I passed a group of women from the neighborhood, I overheard them talking about the Crofts. They're rich, sure, but they're as private as a sealed tomb. I heard the younger son changed completely after the accident. Moody. "Yeah, what good is all that money if your body is broken? Must be hard to find a wife." I pulled my mask up higher and walked faster, their words like thorns scratching at my ears. I hadn't even met the man yet. I had heard 100 things about my future husband. Strangely, amidst all the rumors, the thing that scared me most wasn't that he was in a wheelchair. It was that I would have to spend the rest of my life with a complete stranger. That evening, as I was sorting through old clothes in my closet, my mother came over. She placed a small wooden box on the bed. I opened it. Inside was a pair of tiny gold earrings and a delicate faded chain. "What are you giving me these for?" "This is your nest egg. I was saving them for when you got married." Hearing the words "got married," my heart winced. "Put them away, Mom." "I don't need them." She shook her head. "You do. We may be poor, but my daughter can't go to her new home with nothing. There's an old American saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. It means a family's fortune can be won and lost that quickly. That's why for a woman it's always better to have something of your own. But for a woman, it's always better to have something of your own." I watched her trembling hands stroke the wooden box, and my eyes stung. It turned out that while I was still lost in confusion, she had already been preparing herself for this for a long time. Perhaps every mother is like that. Even at a dead end, she tries to preserve a little dignity for her child. 2 days later, the Croft family messaged that they would come over to discuss the specifics. It was so fast I hadn't even gotten used to the idea that I had agreed. I said to my mother, "Why are they in such a hurry?" She was taking her pills and nearly choked. "A hurry, I suppose. They want to settle things quickly." I looked straight at her. "Or is it because you're hiding something from me?" She turned away, fumbling with the hem of her shirt. "You can ask all you want. It won't change anything." That night I barely slept, lying awake listening to my mother toss and turn in the adjacent bed. I thought about everything. The hospital forms this apartment. How empty would it be if one day it was just me? I thought about the man named Julian, wondering what his voice sounded like, what his eyes looked like, if he was as cold as people said. And then I thought about myself. Since when had a person like me resorted to agreeing to marry a stranger just to save her mother? But thinking it over and over, I could still only see one path. The next morning I went out to the fire escape to hang some laundry. A rare bit of sunlight filtered through the neighboring buildings, pale and weak. My mother's voice called from inside. "Chloe, yes, don't worry too much. Everything will be all right." I wrung out a towel, watching the water droplets fall to the alley below. Then I turned and replied softly, "I'm not afraid of hardship, Mom. I'm just afraid of taking the wrong step." But even as I said it, I knew one thing clearly. Whether the path ahead was smooth or a pitfall, I no longer had the right to stand still. 3 days later, the Croft family came for a formal meeting. To call it a meeting was just to observe formalities. In reality, everything was happening so fast, I felt like I had to take the next step before I could even catch my breath. Our small apartment had been cleaned since dawn. I wiped down the old wooden table and chairs, set out a new teapot, and arranged a plate of store-bought cookies and some almonds my mother had saved. We might be poor, but as Mom always said, poor in pocket, rich in pride. She was determined not to let them see a messy home. She sat on the bed, propped up by pillows, her face paler than usual. I helped her into a simple but clean beige blouse, fastening the buttons and reminding her, "Just sit with them for a little while. If you feel tired, go back and rest. Don't push yourself." She looked at me, her gaze deep. "You should dress up nicely today, too." I gave a faint smile. "What for, Mom? They're coming to see a daughter-in-law, not to shop for a mannequin." She sighed. "You always say such stubborn things. But what girl doesn't want to look her best?" At least once I didn't answer. I went to my closet and took out a dark green dress I had bought for my boss's daughter's wedding last year. The fabric wasn't expensive and the cut was simple, but it was better than my faded work clothes. Looking in the mirror, I saw my face had grown thinner, with faint dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep. Fine, I told myself. They're coming to ask for my hand. I can't let Mom lose face. Around 9 o'clock, the sound of a car stopping echoed up from the street. Both Mom and I tensed. Cars weren't rare on our block, but a sleek black sedan like that one glance was enough to know it didn't belong here. I smoothed my dress and went to open the door. 3 men and 1 woman got out. They were all impeccably dressed, not flashy, but exuding an air of quiet wealth. The man in the lead was in his 50s, tall and straight-shouldered with silver at his temples, but a still handsome face. He wore a crisp white shirt and a light gray blazer. As he stepped inside, he nodded politely. "Hello. I'm Richard Croft, Julian's father." His voice was deep and warm, the voice of a man used to making decisions while maintaining grace. Behind him was a slightly older man, with a discreet expression holding a briefcase. The last man was in his 60s with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes. The woman with them was elegantly dressed but not ostentatious, probably a close relative. I bowed my head slightly. "Hello, Mr. Croft. Please come in." Just as I stepped aside to let them enter, my mother came out from her room. And in that instant, something happened very quickly, but I would remember it forever. The moment my mother saw Richard Croft, her expression changed completely. It wasn't ordinary surprise. It was a genuine, profound shock. Her hand, which had been resting on the bedpost, tightened until her knuckles turned white. And Mr. Croft's stride faltered for just 1 beat. Just one. Then both of them immediately composed their faces as if nothing had happened. But I saw it all. My heart hammered in my chest. Mr. Croft spoke first, his voice as calm as before. "Hello, ma'am. We apologize for arriving so abruptly." My mother pressed her lips together and nodded. "Please have a seat. Our home is small. Please forgive any lack of courtesy." The way she addressed him felt so distant, so formal, that it only confirmed my suspicion that there was a history between them. Everyone sat down. The man with the briefcase introduced himself as Mr. Vinson, the family's lawyer. The older man was Mr. Peterson, the longtime estate manager for the Croft family. A lawyer at a pre-wedding meeting. This felt more like a negotiation than a marriage proposal. Mr. Croft's eyes scanned our small apartment before he spoke slowly. We've come today to formally speak with you and with Chloe. We've discussed the general terms, but if there's anything you're not comfortable with, please be direct. My mother lowered her head slightly. My family is small. I'm ill, and honestly, all I wish for is for my daughter to have a stable place to land. Hearing that, a lump formed in my throat. I hated the feeling of sitting here like an item being weighed on a scale, a stable home versus hospital bills. But in front of these people, I sat up straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The woman who had come with them finally smiled. Chloe looked so kind and gentle. Our family values girls who are sensible and not flashy. I could only offer a polite reply. Thank you. I have many shortcomings, Mr. Croft looked at me, his gaze assessing but not obvious. What is your line of work? I work in administration for an electrical supply distributor, sir. Is the job stable? It pays the bills. He nodded, his finger tapping lightly on the arm of the chair. The small gesture made me feel he was calculating something. Mr. Peterson said almost nothing, merely observing in silence. The lawyer, Mr. Vincent occasionally opened his briefcase to check a document before closing it again. My mother let out a long cough. I quickly stood up to pour her some water and pat her back. Mr. Croft watched the scene, his voice softening. I've heard about your illness. We've already spoken with the hospital. The arrangements for your treatment can be made very soon. I looked up. So, this had all been prepared in advance, and prepared meticulously. It wasn't a case of proposing and then figuring out the details. It was figuring out all the details and then coming to propose. The thought made my heart grow a little colder. My mother whispered, "My family is deeply indebted to you." Mr. Croft frowned slightly. We're soon to be one family. Please don't be so formal. Hearing the words "one family," my chest felt heavy. One family. Why did every word spoken feel like it was being placed on a scale? After some more conversation, Mr. Croft put down his teacup and said decisively, "If your side has no further concerns, we would like to arrange for the wedding to happen soon. Simple, private. Within a week would be ideal." I jerked my head up. A week. Even knowing things were rushed, I hadn't expected it to be that fast. My mother's lips trembled, but in an instant she had nodded. "Yes, if you've already decided, I have no objections." I turned to look at her, my eyes surely showing my shock, because she quickly avoided my gaze. I understood then. She wasn't just agreeing. It was as if she had been waiting to say those exact words. I spoke up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Croft, a wedding is a major event. Isn't a week a bit too rushed, Mr.?" Croft looked at me, not with annoyance, but with a slow reply. "It is rushed, but waiting may not be better. Your mother needs treatment soon, and on our side we also want things settled quietly to avoid unnecessary publicity." The answer was perfectly reasonable, so reasonable it was unassailable. But that very perfection made me feel that there was a part of the truth that was being left unsaid. The meeting ended more quickly than I had imagined. All the proper words were said, all the courtesies observed. An outsider would have praised the groom's family for being so considerate and proper. Only I, sitting in the middle of my own home, felt like a stranger. It was as if everything was happening around me, but not necessarily to me. As I walked them to the door, I happened to glance back. My mother was standing in the doorway, and Mr. Croft was stepping down from the threshold. Their eyes met again. No one spoke a word, but that look. It was as heavy as a piece of the past that someone had unexpectedly unearthed, dusted off, and placed squarely in the present. The door closed, the sound of the car fading down the street. I turned back and looked at my mother for a long time. "You knew him before, didn't you?" My mother sat down on the edge of the bed, her hand on her chest as if she were short of breath. She didn't answer right away. Her face had gone pale, and her eyes looked cloudy like someone trying to swallow a bitter memory. Before I could ask my mother any more about Mr. Croft, events swept me away like a flood. Exactly 1 week after that meeting, I was in a wedding dress. People say a girl's wedding day should be happy, exciting, a day to remember for a lifetime. But that morning, as I sat in front of a mirror while a stranger styled my hair and applied makeup, my heart felt as still as a frozen pond. It wasn't that I wasn't scared. I was so scared that I had no energy left to tremble. The hotel where the wedding was held was in the heart of Manhattan, glittering and polished. From the marble steps to the grand lobby to the ballroom, everything smelled intoxicatingly of lilies and orchids. The chandeliers were so bright, they made my eyes water. Stepping out of the car holding the hem of my gown, I felt like I had stumbled onto the set of some movie about the rich and famous. A few years ago, passing a place like this, I would have just glanced through the glass windows before hurrying on my way. And yet today, I was the bride standing in the very center of it. A makeup artist walking beside me whispered in my ear, "Try not to look down so much. It ruins your presence." I almost laughed. Presence. My stomach was a knot of tangled wires. My mother wasn't strong enough to move around much, so the Crofts had arranged for her to rest in a private suite beforehand. Before I walked into the ballroom, she held my hand for a long time. Her hand was cold and trembling. "I'm so sorry, Chloe." I shook my head, squeezing her hand back. "Don't say you're sorry today, Mom. Just sit quietly and save your strength for me." Her eyes reddened. "My daughter has been wronged." I pressed my lips together, suppressing a sigh. "It's okay, Mom. They're waiting." And then, I walked out. As I walked down the aisle, a soft, elegant melody began to play. I took each step so slowly I could hear my own heart beating. On either side were unfamiliar faces. The Croft family business partners, acquaintances, everyone was beautifully dressed, their laughter measured. I was being scrutinized from head to toe. And then I saw Julian. He was at the end of the aisle, seated in a sleek black wheelchair dressed in a perfectly tailored ivory suit. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a straight back. His features were so sharp that even in profile I could see the clean line of his jaw and his deep-set eyes. If it weren't for the wheelchair, no one would have guessed he had been in an accident. Even seated, he had a strange presence. Not one of weakness that elicited pity, but one of coldness and reserve that made you unsure whether to approach or keep your distance. That was the first time I met my husband. All the rumors I had heard suddenly faded away. Before me was a handsome but incredibly cold man. The coldness wasn't in his expressionless face, but in the way he looked at everything with a detached familiarity, maintaining a clear distance from the world. When I reached him, he looked up at me. Just one look, not long, not short. Then, he gave a slight nod. I nodded back. And that was it. No greeting, no question, not even a polite smile for the woman he had just married. I knew this marriage didn't begin with love, but that moment still made my heart sink. The distance between us was even greater than I had imagined. The ceremony was a blur of practiced words about two families, about destiny, about an auspicious day. It was like a well-rehearsed play. I moved beside Julian to the stage, accepted flowers, bowed to guests, and raised a champagne flute. Every one of his movements was precise, economical, revealing nothing. An outsider would have praised the second son of the Croft family for maintaining his composure and dignity despite his circumstances. But I, standing right next to him, felt like I was standing next to a beautiful, cold statue. During the ring exchange, my hand trembled slightly, not from emotion, but from the sudden, stark reality of it all. The ring slid onto my finger like a soft but firm lock. I looked up and caught the eyes of a few guests below their expressions, a mix of curiosity and judgment. I faintly heard a woman's voice. "She looks sweet, doesn't she?" Another voice replied softer. Sweet or not, her life certainly just changed. My ears burned. I had expected words like that, but hearing them still felt like a pinprick. The world is quick to see the wedding gown and the chandeliers, but few see the price a woman has to pay to wear them. The reception was not overly extravagant, but every dish served was a testament to the Croft family's status. Richard Croft moved from table to table, his demeanor dignified, his speech impeccable. At times I saw him glance towards my mother, a quick look that he would immediately avert. It was a fleeting glance that no one else noticed, but to me, it was anything but normal. As for Julian, he barely spoke a word from beginning to end other than what was absolutely necessary. When people congratulated him, he nodded. When I fumbled with the train of my dress, he waited patiently. When a waiter pushed the cart slightly off course, he just frowned slightly and adjusted his own position. Everything was neat, contained, with not a single emotion allowed to spill out. At one point, we were posing for a photo. The photographer chirped bride and groom. A little closer. "Groom, look at the bride, please." Perfect, beautiful. A faint scent of cologne drifted from Julian's suit. He turned to look at me as requested, but his eyes were as still as the surface of a lake. I suddenly found my own situation ridiculous. To the outside world, we probably looked like a beautiful couple. But to me, we felt like two strangers just trying to get through a formality. After the reception, I changed into a simpler dress to go home with my husband. As I walked to the car, I glanced back at my mother. She was in a separate car behind us, her face pale, but she managed to smile to reassure me. That smile made my heart clench. I knew I wasn't getting into this car for any romantic dream. I was getting into it for the woman who was waiting for a chance to live. The car left the hotel, gliding through the brightly lit streets. I sat next to Julian in silence, my hands in my lap. He was silent too. The only sound in the car was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. After a long while, I spoke first. "Thank you. For the hospital arrangements for my mother." He didn't turn to look at me, just replied curtly. It was part of the agreement. His voice was deep, neither heavy nor light. After that, I didn't know what else to say. Part of the agreement. Yes, to him this was just another clause in a prearranged marriage. But to me, it was the pillar holding up my mother's life. Worlds apart, the car turned into a quiet, tree-lined street of mansions. I looked out the window and felt myself moving further and further away from our little apartment, away from my old life, which for all its hardships was where I belonged. From the moment I passed through those gates, I knew I had truly entered a different world. A world that from the very first night made me feel like a bride who had lost her way. Julian's private residence, a modern penthouse, was not far from the main Croft estate, but separate enough to be its own world. As the car pulled up to the private entrance, I saw a sleek lobby, minimalist art on the walls, and large glass windows reflecting the soft city lights. Everything was beautiful in a spare, immaculate way. But like a luxury hotel, everything was in its perfect place, lacking the warmth of a home. I stepped out of the car, the hem of my dress brushing against the curb. A housekeeper, a woman in her 40s, bowed her head. "Good evening, Mr. Julian." "Good evening." Mrs. Croft. The title, Mrs. Croft, made me pause. This morning I was just Chloe from Queens. By nightfall, I was Mrs. Croft to a stranger. A person's life can truly pivot in a single day. Julian guided his wheelchair, straight inside. I followed my eyes, taking in the surroundings. The living room was vast, with high ceilings, a pale gray sofa, a wall of bookshelves, and a grand piano next to a large window overlooking the city. There were no family photos, no vibrant flower arrangements, nothing superfluous to create a sense of intimacy. The entire penthouse was so quiet and tidy that I felt if I were to accidentally drop a glass, the sound of it shattering would echo for a long time. The housekeeper served tea and then quietly withdrew. Mr. Peterson, the estate manager, hadn't come with us, so in the living room it was just me and Julian. For the first time since the wedding, we were in a completely private space with no music, no guests, no one to force a smile or a nod for. I stood by the sofa, my hands twisting the fabric of my dress. I had never experienced a silence that felt so long. Julian broke it first. He opened a drawer in the end table beside him, took out a black credit card and placed it on the glass coffee table in front of me. "For household expenses," he said, his voice even. "You can use this for now." I looked at the card, a small knot of tension in me, easing slightly. At least it was a practical start. I nodded slightly. "Thank you." Julian said nothing more, simply reaching for his glass of water, as if giving me the card was just another item checked off his to-do list. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from the bank, likely an alert that a supplementary card had been activated. I opened it out of habit, and my hand froze. The credit limit was $500. I thought I had misread it. I scrolled down and looked again. Still $500. Not a penny more. A few months ago, $500 was not an amount I would have scoffed at. It could cover groceries for a couple of weeks, some of my mother's co-pays, a utility bill. But here now, after a lavish wedding in a grand hotel inside a penthouse, where the coffee table alone was probably worth more than my annual salary, $500 felt like a soft but stinging slap in the face. I looked up at Julian. "This is for my expenses, yes." "Are you sure you didn't grab the wrong card?" He looked at me directly, as if he didn't understand why I was asking. "No." A lump formed in my throat and a hot flush of shame crept up my neck. So in his eyes, I was exactly the type of person he thought I was, a bride, bought and paid for, who only needed to be tossed a pittance to be kept in her place. The pride I had been trying to swallow since my mother first mentioned the proposal suddenly reared its head. I placed the card back on the table, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know this marriage isn't about feelings, but if you wanted to remind me of my position, you didn't have to do it like this." Julian frowned slightly. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this," I said, a bitter smile on my face. "I may be poor, but I'm not so clueless that I don't understand what $500 means in a place like this." His eyes grew colder. "You're overthinking it." Am I overthinking it, or are you looking down on me? I don't have time for that. His words were sharp as a thin blade. No raised voice, no anger, but it cut right through my self-respect. I took a deep breath and said no more. People say there's shame in begging for food. At that moment I felt there could be shame in money too. The amount wasn't the issue. The shame was in feeling that you were being measured by someone else and found to be worth so very little. The housekeeper returned to ask if I needed anything. I shook my head, my body exhausted after a long day. All I wanted was to get out of this heavy dress and lie down to hell with tomorrow. Julian's bedroom was on the main floor, spacious and private with a door opening onto a terrace. A large bed with white linens, built-in closets, everything was pristine to the point of being sterile. I went into the adjoining dressing room, my fingers fumbling with the tiny buttons on the back of my dress. Looking at myself in the mirror, my lipstick was faded, my hair a mess. The bride in the mirror didn't look like someone who had just had a joyous day, but like someone who had just completed a long, exhausting journey. When I came out in a modest set of pajamas, Julian was beside the bed, preparing to transfer himself from his wheelchair to the mattress. I stopped. The movement was clearly not easy. His hands gripped the edge of the bed, his shoulders tensed, each motion slow but deliberate. It was as if he had done this so many times he was used to it and hated having anyone watch. I watched for a few seconds, a strange feeling stirring inside me. Even though I was angry, I couldn't ignore his struggle. I moved closer instinctively. "Let me help you." Julian's head snapped toward me, his voice low and hard. "I don't need it." But I said, "I don't need it." I froze. But just then, perhaps because my approach had distracted him or because his hand placement was slightly off, his body swayed. I lurched forward to catch him. We both lost our balance. I heard a dull thud against the bed frame, and then I was falling with Julian tipping to the side, one arm bracing himself against the floor. The space between our faces was so close I could hear his breathing. The clean scent of soap, the lingering trace of his cologne, the sharp intake of breath in that chaotic moment made my heart race. For a normal married couple, this might have been an awkward, even funny situation. But for us, it was just another wound. Julian immediately pushed my hand away, his eyes darkening. "I told you to stay away." His words were like a splash of cold water. All the hurt, all the anger from the credit card incident welled up into a tight knot in my chest. I scrambled to my feet and backed away. "Fine. From now on, if you fall, if anything happens, I won't interfere." He didn't answer. Just used his arms to push himself up onto the edge of the bed, his face taut with a mixture of pain and bruised pride. I felt that every second I stood there was a second too long. I turned to the long sofa in the corner of the room, grabbed a pillow, and lay down. The lights dimmed, leaving only a soft golden glow. I turned my back to the bed, staring into the darkness. My wedding night ended like this, no candles, no sweet nothings, not even a polite pretense of being husband and wife. Just a $500 credit limit, a clumsy fall, and the cold back of a stranger. I don't know when I drifted off to sleep. I only remember that when I woke up in the early morning, there was a light blanket draped over me. I sat up looking around. Julian was gone. I touched the edge of the blanket, a quiet question rising in my mind. What kind of man was he really? The first morning after the wedding, I sat on the edge of the sofa for a long time, trying to gather my thoughts. The light blanket was still on my shoulders, laid so neatly it was as if the person who put it there wanted to leave no trace. I looked over at the bed. The sheets and pillows were perfectly smooth without a single wrinkle. If it weren't for the blanket, I might have thought last night was just a fitful dream after an exhausting day. I got dressed and opened the door. The penthouse was so quiet in the morning I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Early sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting pale stripes on the polished floor. The housekeeper from last night, Maria, was setting breakfast on the dining table. Seeing me, she immediately straightened up. "Good morning, Mrs. Croft." I felt a little awkward at the title and nodded slightly. "Please, you can just call me Chloe." She gave a hesitant smile. "Of course. My name is Maria. Please let me know if you need anything." I looked at the table. There was a bowl of oatmeal, a few slices of toast, and a glass of warm milk. On the other side of the table was a half-empty coffee cup. I asked without thinking. "Has Mr. Julian already gone to work?" Maria replied promptly. "He's in his home office just off the living room. He wakes up very early." I murmured an "oh" and sat down. As my spoon touched the oatmeal, I suddenly remembered the mornings in my old apartment. A bowl of plain oatmeal, maybe a hard-boiled egg if we were lucky. Here, everything was more beautiful, more abundant, but I found it harder to swallow. They say you get used to what you eat. But I had just stepped into this home and already felt like a stray grain of rice in a pot. After a few bites, I called my mother. She answered quickly. "Hello, Chloe." Just hearing her voice, my eyes welled up, but I forced my tone to be cheerful. "Hi, Mom. Are you up? Did you take your medicine? I've been up for a while. How are things over there?" "They're fine, Mom. The house is quiet, and the staff is very kind." She laughed softly. "That's good. I can rest easy then." I swallowed hard, looking out at the sunlit terrace. I couldn't tell her about the credit card or the fall last night. A sick person like her would only worry more. "You just focus on getting better. Let me know what the hospital says." "Okay, you try not to overthink things either. You're newlyweds. You'll get used to each other eventually." I clutched the phone. Her words were simple, but only someone in my shoes would understand that some distances can't be closed just by getting used to them. I said okay a few more times and hung up, sitting in silence for a while longer. After eating, I walked around the penthouse, like a guest, exploring a new place. The living room flowed into the dining area, and beyond that was a large study with glass doors looking out onto the terrace. The bookshelves were filled with titles on business law and finance, with a few worn-out classic novels mixed in. I stopped in front of the glossy black grand piano by the window. As my finger lightly touched the lid, a familiar deep voice came from behind me. "You play?" I jumped, turning around. Julian was at the door of the study, his hands on the wheels of his chair. He was wearing a gray button-down shirt today, the sleeves rolled up neatly, his face looking more refreshed than it had last night. "No," I said, pulling my hand back. "I was just looking." "I see," he replied curtly, and then guided his chair back into the study. I stood there, unsure if I should follow or get out of the way. In the end, I just quietly stepped aside. The air between us since last night felt like it had an invisible glass wall. We could see each other, hear each other, but neither of us could reach out and break it. At lunchtime, Maria asked me what I wanted to eat. I told her something simple would be fine, maybe some steamed fish and a salad. She looked at me with some surprise. "Is that all, ma'am?" "Yes, that's what I'm used to." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There aren't many people in this house, so meals are usually simple. Mr. Julian especially dislikes fuss. You'll get used to it." There it was again. "You'll get used to it." It was probably the phrase I had heard most since the wedding. But no one told me how. Get used to sleeping in a room that was too big. Get used to everyone bowing and calling me Mrs. Croft. Or get used to a husband whose one sentence was as long as most people's 3. In the afternoon, I rolled up my sleeves and helped Maria fold napkins and wipe down some cups on a shelf. She saw me and quickly tried to stop me. "Mrs. Croft, please let me do that." "Mr. Julian wouldn't be pleased if he saw you." I smiled. "It's not like my hands are broken. I did all sorts of chores at my old home." Maria looked at me and then spoke as if confiding a secret. "It's not that. It's just... Mr. Julian doesn't like people disrupting the order of the house." Hearing that, I paused. So it wasn't just me who felt suffocated here. Even a misplaced napkin could be a cause for concern. Near evening, I brought a cup of hot tea to the study. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I thought for better or worse I was technically his wife and I couldn't just remain silent forever. Julian was reviewing some files at his desk. Hearing me, he looked up. "I made some tea," I said, placing the cup down. "If you don't want it, you can just leave it there." Julian looked at the teacup, then at me for a few seconds. "Thank you." I was a little taken aback. It was a short phrase, but it was the softest thing I had heard from him so far. I had taken a few steps away when he suddenly called after me. "The hospital sent over your mother's appointment schedule this afternoon. I had my assistant forward it to you." I turned back sharply. He knew the hospital had contacted his office. He replied matter-of-factly, "Rest assured her treatment plan will not be delayed." I stood there silent. He spoke so bluntly, but a strange feeling stirred within me. This man was truly odd. He wouldn't offer a single comforting word, but the things that needed to be done were done before anyone even had to ask. Like the blanket last night. Like the hospital schedule this afternoon. No fuss, no taking credit. Just quietly putting the right thing in the right place. That evening, when I went to the bedroom, I saw a new multi-plug power strip next to the sofa already plugged in. Earlier that day, I had casually mentioned to Maria that my phone charger cord was a bit too short. I looked at the power strip for a moment, then glanced over at the desk. Julian was reading as if he had nothing to do with it. I didn't ask, and he didn't say anything. But from that quiet evening, I began to understand something. The hardest part of living in this house wasn't the food or the etiquette. The hardest part was living in a place so full of everything, yet still feeling like you were the one thing that was out of place. And the other hard part was that my husband, who seemed as cold as steel, would sometimes reveal the smallest sliver of kindness. So small that if you weren't paying attention, you could live a lifetime and never notice it. The next day, just after 9 in the morning, Maria came to find me. "Mrs. Croft, could you please get ready, you and Mr. Julian will be going to the main estate for lunch." I was folding clothes and paused. I knew I would have to make a formal visit sooner or later, but hearing the words main estate, my heart still skipped a beat. The penthouse I was living in was already enough to make me watch my every step. How much more intimidating would the main Croft family mansion be, where Richard Croft, the relatives, and a host of scrutinizing eyes were waiting? I opened my closet and chose a simple cream-colored dress, nothing flashy. I put my hair in a low bun and wore just a touch of lipstick to add some color to my face. In a place like this, being ostentatious would only get me into trouble. A new daughter-in-law from my background showing off would only invite gossip. Julian was waiting in the living room. He looked me over once and said curtly, "That's fine." I didn't know if it was a compliment or just a confirmation that I wasn't dressed inappropriately, but for him, "that's fine" was probably a full sentence. On the way there, I sat beside him, my hands clenched together. Julian was looking at something on his tablet. I glanced at his profile, thinking how strange this man was. He was about to introduce his new wife to his family, yet his face was as calm as if he were going to a business meeting. He noticed me looking and asked without looking up. Nervous, I gave a weak smile. "Try swapping places with me and see if you're nervous." He finally looked up then. "Just mind your manners and you'll be fine," I replied, half joking. "If people are determined to dislike you, good manners won't change their minds." The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. It was hard to tell if it was a smile. "Then it's even more important to remain calm." His words weren't exactly comforting, but they did make me feel a bit more grounded. The main estate was on a large gated property, the driveway lined with towering oak trees. The house itself was a classic brick mansion, stately and reserved. You could immediately feel the atmosphere of old money. No need for noise. Its very presence was enough to make people lower their voices. I followed Julian inside. The grand foyer had polished marble floors and a massive crystal chandelier. Staff moved about silently, their footsteps barely making a sound. Richard Croft was sitting at a large mahogany table in the living room next to 2 older women I assumed were aunts. Seeing us, I immediately bowed my head. "Hello, Father." "Hello, everyone." One of the aunts, wearing a moss-green cashmere sweater, looked me up and down, a small, tight smile on her face. "So, this is the new daughter-in-law. She looks docile." The other aunt took a sip of her tea and added, "Docile is good. All this family needs is someone who knows her place." I heard them and understood immediately. Every word sounded polite, but the subtext was a clear reminder of my status. I replied softly, "Yes, I have much to learn." Richard Croft nodded, his tone placating. "That's a good attitude. Living in this house, you'll have to get used to our ways sooner or later." Julian said nothing, just moved his chair to its usual spot by the tea table. I sat slightly off to the side, my back straight, my hands in my lap. I had never been in a space where I felt my every move was being watched so intensely. A few moments later, a young woman came down the stairs. It was Tiffany. Today she was wearing a pale pink silk dress, her hair in perfect curls. As she walked, a trail of perfume followed her. The moment she saw me, she smiled. "Oh, sister-in-law, you're here. I thought you'd still be busy getting used to your new home." Her overly sweet tone made my skin crawl. I just smiled back. "Hello, Tiffany." Tiffany blinked. "Well, as long as you fit in, I guess any house can be a home." It sounded like a casual remark, but it was clearly laced with malice. As lunchtime approached, the staff began setting the large dining table. I stood up to help Maria arrange the silverware. After all, I was the new daughter-in-law. I couldn't just sit there while everyone else worked. Maria quietly told me to leave it, but I took the tray of utensils anyway, telling myself that whatever I did, I had to do it properly. The powder room for the female relatives was near the hallway, leading to the dining room. As I walked past, the door was slightly ajar. I didn't pay it any mind and kept walking. But just as the family was about to sit down for the meal, an older housekeeper rushed out, her face pale. "Sir, Mrs. Croft's pearl earring is missing." The living room fell silent. The aunt in the green sweater shot to her feet. What? My earring was in its velvet box in the powder room. How could it be gone? The housekeeper stammered. It was there just a little while ago, ma'am, but now the box is empty. The calm atmosphere instantly shifted. I was standing near the hallway, still holding the tray of utensils, not yet understanding what was happening when I heard Tiffany's voice artfully casual. That's so strange. Not many people have been in that hallway today, have they? Another aunt immediately replied, No, the family all know where things are kept. Who would be foolish enough to touch it? Tiffany tilted her head, her eyes flicking toward me for a fraction of a second. I'm just saying, but I think I saw my new sister-in-law walk past there a little while ago. My hands went cold. It was true I had walked past, but that's all I did. I put the tray down on the table and turned to look directly at Tiffany. Yes, I walked past. But walking past doesn't mean I took anything. Tiffany quickly waved her hands, feigning innocence. Oh, I didn't say you took it, I was just mentioning it so everyone would remember. That was the most venomous way to do it. Not a direct accusation, but enough to make every eye in the room turn to me. I could feel their gazes, scanning my dress, my hands, my face. The look reserved for a new, poor daughter-in-law at the exact moment a valuable item goes missing in her husband's home. No harsh words were needed. The suspicion alone was enough to humiliate. Just then, Mr. Peterson, the estate manager, came in from another room, his voice still calm. Sir, perhaps we should check the security cameras in the hallway. His words were polite, but they landed like stones. Hearing that, a hot wave of indignation washed over me. If I panicked or started crying now, the reputation of the poor thieving daughter-in-law would stick to me for the rest of my life. I took a deep breath and spoke clearly. Father, if there is any suspicion, please check the cameras publicly in front of everyone. I have nothing to hide. The room was dead silent. Perhaps they didn't expect me to be so bold. Tiffany pursed her lips into a faint smirk. My sister-in-law is very brave. I turned to her. It's not about being brave. When your honor is at stake, staying silent is the same as admitting guilt. For the first time since entering this house, I didn't avert my gaze. Richard Croft sat in silence for a few seconds, then slowly nodded. Very well. If Chloe says so, then let's check and be clear. No one in this house wants to wrong an innocent person, but we cannot allow for ambiguity. I heard his words and felt both cold and angry. The innocent person was clearly me, yet I still had to stand there and be treated like a suspect. I subconsciously glanced at Julian. He was still sitting quietly, his face showing almost no expression. He didn't defend me, didn't dismiss it, didn't say a single word. In that moment, my heart sank. It seemed that in my first battle in my husband's home, I was completely on my own. I stood in the middle of the living room, my back straight, but my heart felt like it had been plunged into ice water. All around me were the eyes of the family, the staff, the aunts, sipping tea just a few feet away. A person's honor can be a fragile thing. When it's questioned in front of a crowd, it hurts as if someone is methodically peeling away layers of your skin. Richard Croft set down his teacup, his voice slow and firm. Mr. Peterson, check the footage from the hallway near the powder room immediately. Mr. Peterson bowed his head slightly. Yes, sir. I'll have someone pull it up. I watched him go, my hands cold, but I managed to keep my voice steady. I would like to be present when you review it. One of the aunts glanced at me, a slight smirk on her lips. Good for you. An innocent person has nothing to fear. I turned and offered a very thin smile. Yes, ma'am. All I can do is stand tall. Hearing this, Tiffany let out a soft scoff. She still maintained her air of innocent bystander, but her eyes held a flicker of annoyance that I wasn't panicking as she had hoped. People who try to corner others love to see their victims flustered. But that day, the more it hurt, the clearer my head became. The security office was next to a back staircase. As I walked there with the others, a strange thought occurred to me. A wealthy family like the Crofts, with their strict rules and numerous staff, must have tight security. If someone dared to pull a stunt like this, it couldn't have been an impulsive act. It was either incredibly reckless, or they had someone powerful backing them up. As the technician brought up the camera system, the screen displayed feeds from various hallways and entrances. Mr. Peterson pointed. Pull up the footage from 1120 to 1140 AM. The technician typed a few commands, and then froze. Sir, the data for that time period is missing. Missing? What do you mean, Richard? Croft demanded. Sir, it's not that the camera was broken. It looks like someone deleted it. As soon as he said that, the air in the room grew thick. I felt my heart thud. If it were just a missing earring, they could have pinned the crime of petty theft on me. But a deleted camera file meant this was a premeditated trap. And if it was a trap, I wasn't just a person under suspicion. I was the target. One of the aunts gasped. Good heavens, who would do such a thing in this house? Tiffany clicked her tongue. How clever. Who could have planned it so well? I turned and looked straight at her. It is clever. So clever that the person who lost something also had a ready-made scapegoat. Tiffany's expression faltered for a second before she forced a laugh. Sister-in-law, you make it sound so dramatic. I'm just concerned about the household's integrity. I replied immediately without raising my voice. The household's integrity is about distinguishing right from wrong, not about conveniently pointing a finger at the newcomer, the one with less money. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I saw the color drain from Tiffany's face. She probably thought that a girl from my background would just cower and cry. But not everyone who is poor is also weak. I had endured enough since the day I married into this family. Richard Croft's voice was stern. Quiet. We will get to the bottom of this before anyone says another word. The technician continued to scan the system logs. A few minutes later he turned back, his voice trembling. Sir, someone logged in with a technician's password to delete the file. Who has that password? Mr. Peterson asked. Only me, sir, and Tim, who handles IT support. At the mention of that name, a young male staff member standing near the door immediately went pale. I recognized him as the one who had been lurking in the hallway earlier. Mr. Peterson turned to him. Tim, come here. The young man stepped forward, sweat beading on his temples. Yes, sir. Mr. Peterson's demeanor was still calm, but his expression had hardened. Did you access the camera system this morning? No, sir? The technician interjected. But my account was logged into at that exact time from the computer in the utility room behind the kitchen. Tim stammered. Maybe someone borrowed my computer. I stood there listening and suddenly saw it all clearly. This was a classic case of throwing a stone and hiding your hand. The person who took the fall would never be the one who truly wanted to harm me. It was then that Julian spoke. He had been almost completely silent until this point, but when his voice cut through the room, everyone fell quiet. Check the access log for the utility room door. The technician quickly switched screens. The keycard access list appeared clear as day. At the exact time in question, Tim's keycard had been used to open the door. There was no denying it. The young man's legs seemed to give out from under him. Julian's voice was low but heavy. Tim, tell us now. Don't make me ask a second time. I glanced at him. Julian's expression was as calm as ever, but his eyes were different. It wasn't the silence of indifference I had perceived in the living room. It was the cold precision of someone who had just found their opponent's weak spot. Tim swallowed hard, his eyes darting from Richard Croft to Tiffany. That single glance was all the confirmation I needed. The person he was afraid of was the person involved. Richard Croft tapped his hand lightly on the desk. Speak. Tim flinched, then suddenly dropped to his knees. I was wrong, sir. I just deleted the file. I didn't take the earring. Who did you do it for? Mr. Peterson asked. He bit his lip, which was trembling uncontrollably. Miss Tiffany. The room erupted in gasps. Tiffany's face went white. What nonsense are you talking, Tim? Was on the verge of tears. She told me to delete that segment. She said she just wanted to test the new Mrs. Croft to see how she would handle herself. She said it would be fine that she would cover for me. Shut up, Tiffany shrieked, her voice cracking. When did I ever tell you that I stood there listening to the pounding of my own heart? So it was her. Not an impulsive act, not some vague, passive-aggressive remarks, but a deliberate plot to humiliate me and see how I would react. One of the aunts gasped. My goodness, to play such a game on the day the new daughter-in-law is formally introduced. The aunt in the green sweater, the owner of the earring, was shaking with anger. And where is my earring? The older housekeeper who had first reported it missing peeked in from the doorway and whispered, Ma'am, I just found it. It was in an old glove box in the side cabinet. At that, everyone understood. The earring was never lost. It was just hidden to create a scene. Tiffany tried to argue, but Richard Croft cut her off with a single sharp word. Enough. The room fell instantly silent. He looked at Tiffany, his face not angry, but cold. You are an adult. You need to think before you act. This is a home, not a marketplace for you to play games and test people. Tiffany's face flushed crimson, her lip trembling. I was just joking. I almost laughed out loud. How typical of a spoiled person. Even when caught, she thought the words just joking would fix everything. I looked straight at her. Some things aren't a joke, Tiffany. A person's reputation, once you've stained it with your joke, who is going to wash it clean? Tiffany was speechless. She probably never expected someone cornered like me would dare to talk back in front of the whole family. I said no more. At this point, saying more would only cheapen my own victory. Richard Croft rubbed his forehead, his voice weary. Tim, you're dismissed effective today. Tiffany, go to your room and think about what you've done. This matter ends here. No one is to speak of it outside this house. His decision didn't surprise me. The wealthy were like that. The uglier the scandal, the more they wanted to handle it behind closed doors. Tim was fired to cut loose ends, and Tiffany would get a slap on the wrist at most. If I had been the one found guilty, I doubt the matter would have ended so neatly. People began to file out of the room. I was the last to leave my eyes, involuntarily turning to Julian. He guided his wheelchair toward the door and paused beside me. Without looking at me directly, he spoke just loud enough for me to hear. I didn't speak up earlier not because I was ignoring you. I froze. Then, why? Because the person who set the trap hadn't shown their face yet. If I had interfered from the start, you would have only been defended. This way, you were vindicated. He then continued on his way, leaving me standing in the room that still smelled faintly of tea. Just one sentence, but it was like someone had untied the knot that had been tightening in my chest all morning. His silence wasn't indifference. It was him waiting for the right moment for the real culprit to expose themselves. I walked slowly out into the hallway and looked out at the large, sunlit yard. I no longer felt the self-pity of a new bride wrongly accused. In its place was a new, sharp clarity. This Croft family was indeed a battlefield. And from this day forward, I could no longer afford to be the one who kept quiet, just to keep the peace. After the incident with the pearl earring, I thought I'd at least have a few days of peace. But in life, as soon as one wave recedes, another comes crashing in. Exactly 1 week later, Julian informed me during breakfast. There's a family gala at the main estate tomorrow evening. Be ready. I was holding my spoon and looked up. Is it a big event? Everyone who matters will be there. His way of speaking was always the same, short. But if you thought about it, every word had weight. Everyone who matters meant it wasn't just a casual family dinner. It was an occasion for the entire clan to get a good hard look at this new daughter-in-law and decide what kind of person she was. That evening, I stood before my closet. After much consideration, I chose a forest green dress. It was modest, with long sleeves and a high neckline made of a fabric that draped well. When you're going to a place where people love to scrutinize your every move, you have to give them nothing to criticize. I told myself that no matter how many barbs they threw at me tomorrow, I would not be a pincushion for them to jab at will. The next day, the car took us to the main estate, just as the sun was setting. The circular driveway was already lined with luxury cars. The warm golden light from inside spilled out, creating a picture of a happy family reunion. But only those who stepped inside would understand that places like this could often be colder than the winter wind outside. Julian wore a black tuxedo and I had draped a thin silk shawl over my shoulders. As soon as we entered the foyer, I could feel the difference in atmosphere from our last visit. There were more relatives' faces I had never seen before. Everyone spoke in measured tones, their laughter polite. The clinking of teacups, the rustle of expensive fabrics, it all blended into a sound that seemed warm on the surface, but was thick with scrutiny underneath. I followed Julian to greet Richard Croft first. "Good evening, Father." He nodded, his eyes lingering on me a moment longer than usual. "You look well tonight, Chloe." I bowed my head. "Thank you, Father." In the next few minutes, I had to greet 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and a distant cousin-in-law whose name I forgot as soon as I heard it. Marrying into an ordinary family was tiring enough. Marrying into a dynasty with so many branches was exhausting. One wrong form of address could earn you the label of disrespectful or poorly raised. An aunt in her 60s wearing a string of pearls the size of marbles drew out her words. "You're Chloe, aren't you? I hear you worked in an office." "Yes, that's right." "And what does your family do?" The question made me pause. My mother was sick at home, and as for my family in the truest sense, I had never known them. But in front of all these people, I couldn't appear flustered. "My family is very ordinary, ma'am. My mother has been ill for a long time." The aunt nodded sagely. "Ah. Well, now that you're here, you must try to learn our ways. A good family background is a blessing for a daughter-in-law, but an ill-mannered daughter-in-law is a problem no family can fix." I smiled, though the words felt like tiny needles. "I understand. As a daughter-in-law, I must be mindful of my conduct." Another woman standing nearby chimed in. It's good that you know that. Beauty isn't enough, dear. In a family like this, the most important thing is to know your place. The words know your place fell lightly but landed with the weight of a stone. I knew they were speaking to me, and also to each other. Someone like me who had been allowed to enter this family had been blessed, and should therefore know how to bow her head just low enough. I didn't argue, nor did I force a smile. I just replied calmly, yes. As for being a daughter-in-law, I believe the first duty is to live with integrity so as not to bring shame upon myself. My response, though not confrontational, caused a brief silence among the people standing nearby. Perhaps they hadn't expected a girl who looked so meek to be able to respond with such quiet strength. People often mistake silence for weakness. But sometimes, saying just enough is the best way to defend yourself. Just then, a man walked in from the terrace. He was tall and dapper, his hair perfectly styled, his smile the very picture of a well-bred scion. The moment Richard Croft saw him, he called out, "Kevin, over here." I knew at once this was Julian's older brother. Kevin approached, bowed to his father, and then turned to us. "Little brother, you made it." He smiled, his voice smooth as honey. "And this must be my new sister-in-law." I immediately lowered my head. "Hello, Kevin." Kevin extended his hand. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it out of politeness. But the moment our hands touched, I felt a sense of unease. He held on a second too long, not so long that an outsider would notice, but long enough to make me uncomfortable. His eyes, too, were not entirely proper. His mouth smiled, but underneath it was the look of a man accustomed to seeing women as decorative objects. I gently withdrew my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Kevin laughed. "We're family now, no need for formalities. But my little brother is so secretive, waiting until after the wedding to let the family get a proper look at you." Before I could reply, a woman approached from behind him. She wore a cream-colored gown, her hair styled elegantly. She was beautiful, but a sadness in her eyes was more pronounced than her makeup. Kevin turned. "Alara, come here. This is Julian's wife. I guessed this was his fiancée." I nodded a greeting. "Hello, it's nice to meet you." Alara offered a small, weary smile. "Hello, Chloe. You look lovely tonight." Her voice had no malice, no prying curiosity like the others, but there was a deep exhaustion in her eyes, the look of someone accustomed to feeling lonely in a crowded room. As Alara stood beside him, I instinctively glanced at Julian. In that instant, I saw his eyes rest on her for a fleeting moment. It wasn't long or obvious, just a brief pause. But for me, a new bride whose footing was still unsteady, that one glance was enough to cause a small pang in my heart. I didn't know their history. Maybe they were just old acquaintances, but the fact was I had seen it, and once seen it couldn't be unseen. Tiffany was more flamboyant than usual tonight, constantly hovering around Julian with an exaggerated familiarity. One moment she was asking if he wanted tea, the next she was telling a staff member to bring an extra cushion for his wheelchair, all while leaning in close to him, laughing and talking as if she were the one who understood him best. Watching her, I felt a strange and unwelcome annoyance. I had no right to feel that way, I told myself, but emotions rarely listen to reason. The party filled up. I followed the staff around, offering tea and greeting relatives. I had to be mindful whether I was sitting or standing. As the night wore on, the veiled comments grew more frequent. "Girls these days are so lucky, one marriage can change your entire life. It just goes to show fortune favors the bold." They sounded like compliments, but they were all reminders of where I came from. I listened, smiled, and answered each comment just enough. Not evasively, but not aggressively either. I understood that in places like this, the more you bristled, the more they enjoyed it. Only by standing firm and speaking reasonably could you make yourself indigestible. But just when I thought I was clear-headed enough to get through the evening, another feeling crept in, a sense that something was about to happen. Not loud, not obvious, just the feeling of the wind changing before a storm. And I knew that in this house they rarely let a new daughter-in-law have peace for too long. I had just set down a tray of tea when Tiffany glided over, a saccharine smile on her face. She tilted her head, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Sister-in-law, I heard you chose that dress yourself. It's so clever. So simple, yet so appropriate for the situation." I knew at once that situation was not a clean word, but in a room full of people I just replied mildly. "As long as it's presentable, that's what matters. We're here to see family, not to compete in a fashion show." Tiffany gave a quick smirk and then took my arm. "Could you help me with something in the powder room? The clasp on my dress came undone and I'd be embarrassed to ask anyone else." I didn't want to go anywhere alone with her, but I figured in the middle of a crowded party she couldn't do anything too outrageous. I followed her down a side hallway to the guest restroom. The moment we were inside, she let go of my arm, leaned against the marble countertop, and her whole demeanor changed. "Are you really this composed, or is it an act?" I turned to face her directly. "Did you bring me in here just to ask me that?" Tiffany laughed. "I just find it fascinating. Someone can walk out of a rundown apartment in Queens and into a place like this and still keep a straight face. It's quite a talent." I quietly closed the door behind me, my voice growing colder. "And what's wrong with an apartment in Queens? The roof might leak, but at least it's clean inside. Unlike some places that are gilded on the outside, but full of thorns on the inside." Tiffany's eyes widened. She probably didn't expect me to be so direct. "Don't think that just because you married Julian you have a firm footing here. I have never assumed anything." "No assumptions? Yet you have such a sharp tongue." Tiffany sneered, picking up a glass of red wine from the counter. She swirled it gently. "Do you know what kind of person this family appreciates most? The kind who knows her place. Those who start thinking they're real phoenixes usually have a very painful fall." I looked at the wine in her hand, my guard instantly up. "If you have something to say it." Tiffany's lips curled. "I'm saying you should remember that you shouldn't get too attached to borrowed things." As she spoke, her wrist tilted, the dark red wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Before I could step back, Julian's voice, low and sharp, came from the doorway. "Tiffany." She jumped her hand, freezing a single drop of wine falling onto the marble floor like a smear of blood. Julian was sitting just outside the door, his face like ice. "Father is looking for you." Tiffany whipped around, flustered for a beat, then forced a smile. "I was just chatting with my sister-in-law." "Are you done?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the air in the room solidify. Tiffany bit her lip and slammed the glass down on the counter. "Yes, I'm done." She squeezed past me on her way out, her shoulder deliberately bumping mine in a final petty show of anger. I stood there looking at the red stain on the floor and found it absurd. Some people think humiliating others is a sign of strength. In reality, it's just the act of a child with too much money and not enough sense. I stepped out of the room. Julian was already moving his wheelchair down the hall, not looking at me. After a few feet, he said, "Next time, don't go anywhere alone with her." I was taken aback. "Are you afraid I'll get bullied?" "You just were, weren't you?" His matter-of-fact reply left me speechless. He was always like that. Never a soft word, but every sentence had its own sharp point. Before I could say more, a staff member hurried over to announce that dinner was being served. The party was split into two areas, the older guests in the main dining room, and the younger crowd mingling in a reception area off to the side. I instinctively looked for a quiet corner to catch my breath. Just then, a man's voice called from behind me, "Sister-in-law." I turned. It was Kevin standing at the end of a dimly lit corridor, a glass of whiskey in his hand, the same polished smile on his face. "Hello, Kevin. Come over here, I want to have a word with you. It's too noisy out here." I didn't want to go, but I couldn't make a scene in the middle of the hallway. I followed him into a small, quiet sitting room off to the side where the lighting was softer and there was almost no one around. The moment we were inside, I stopped maintaining a clear distance. "If you have something to say, you can say it here." Kevin swirled his drink, his eyes raking over me without any attempt to hide it. "Why so tense? We're just family having a chat. I'm listening." He smiled, his voice like velvet. "My little brother has always been a quiet, difficult person. It must be hard for you being new here." "It's fine." "How can it be fine?" Kevin took a step closer. "A young, beautiful woman like you next to a man like Julian. Just thinking about it, I feel it's such a waste." A chill went down my spine. I took half a step back, my voice tight. "Kevin, I think you've had too much to drink." Kevin laughed. "I'm being serious. A woman's beauty is fleeting. To spend it in a marriage that's no marriage at all. I am your brother's wife." I cut him off, my eyes fixed on his. "And as his older brother, your words should reflect that. I'm just concerned for you." "What's wrong with that?" He took another step. "I just feel sorry for you. A lifetime is long. Make one wrong choice, and you waste your youth." I clenched my fists inside the folds of my dress. A man like Kevin was dangerous because his words were always coated in a layer of just kidding or just concerned. If I got angry, he'd accuse me of misunderstanding. If I showed weakness, he'd press his advantage. I enunciated each word carefully. "Whether it's a waste or not is my business. As for you and your position, As the older brother, you should choose your words more carefully. The smile vanished from Kevin's lips. Sharp-tongued sister-in-law. Not sharp, I replied. I just don't like listening to filth disguised as perfume. The moment the words were out, the door behind Kevin flew open. Julian was there. The light from the hallway backlit his frame, making his face seem even colder. He looked at me first, then at Kevin. The room suddenly felt very small. Kevin was the first to speak, a forced laugh in his voice. Well, look who it is. Just having a chat with my new sister-in-law, getting to know each other. Julian didn't smile. Are you done getting to know each other? Kevin took a sip of his whiskey and shrugged. Why so tense, little brother? I'm not going to eat your wife. At that crude remark, my face burned with humiliation, and Julian's eyes went dark. He guided his wheelchair forward, stopping directly between me and Kevin. His voice was very low. Kevin, I've told you before. If you have something to say to her, say it in front of me. Kevin looked at his brother, his lips still smiling but his eyes cold. You're so protective. People might think we have a problem. Julian replied curtly. We do. The air grew thick with unspoken history. I stood behind Julian for the first time, feeling the full force of the rivalry between these two brothers. It wasn't a momentary clash at a party, nor was it childish competition. It was like a deep underground river that had been flowing for years. Normally unseen, but once the ground cracked, it threatened to pull everything down with it. Kevin set his glass down, his smile bitter. If you're going to be like that, then I won't bother. Wouldn't want my sister-in-law to think I'm bullying her. I looked straight at him. I don't need to think it, Kevin. Some things are obvious, even if they're not said out loud. Kevin shot me a look as sharp as a knife, then turned and walked out. The door closed, leaving a heavy silence in the room. I stood there for a few seconds before speaking. Thank you. Julian didn't turn around right away. After a moment, he said, In this house, never let yourself get cornered in a private space with someone who isn't clean. Hearing his words, I felt a mix of anger and something else. Anger because I had been careless, but also a strange feeling because this man always seemed to show up at the right time, yet never offered a single easy word to lean on. When I followed him back to the main hall, the chatter and laughter were as loud as before, as if nothing had happened. Only I knew that beneath the golden lights and fine china, this house was hiding things much colder than I had ever imagined. Leaving the main estate, I followed Julian into the car, my heart still burning. On the outside, I maintained my composure, but inside, a fire of indignation was smoldering. Kevin's sleazy advances, Tiffany's fake innocence, the judging eyes of everyone at the party, it all coalesced into a suffocating ball of frustration. The car moved smoothly through the night, the streetlights blurring into long streaks outside the window. Inside, there was only the quiet hum of the engine and the smell of new leather. Julian sat beside me, staring straight ahead. I turned my face to the window. We were so close, yet the atmosphere was as distant as if we were on opposite sides of the city. After a while, Julian spoke first. What did you say to him in that room? I whipped my head around. What do you mean? You heard me. I heard you, but I want to know why you're asking, I snapped. I had been holding it in all evening, the veiled insults, the condescending looks, the feeling of always having to fend for myself. I thought that after what just happened, the least he could do was ask if I was okay. Instead, his first question was what I had said to Kevin. Julian's voice remained deep and even. I'm asking so I know how far things went. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Or are you asking to see if I was flirting with your older brother when no one was looking? Julian turned to me, his eyes growing cold. I didn't say that. But it's what it sounds like. As I said it, I felt a lump in my own throat. The pride that had been suppressed for so long had been poked one too many times. Since stepping into the Croft family, I had to learn how to walk, how to talk, how to endure. I was accused of being a thief trapped by my sister-in-law and now harassed by my brother-in-law. And the man sitting next to me, my supposed husband, always responded with cold, clipped questions, as if every emotional situation could be resolved with pure logic. Julian's hand tightened on the armrest. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. My smile was bitter. I have every right to be upset. I was being humiliated right in front of you, and you always act like an outsider. You rescue me at the last second, but then you immediately go back to being distant. I just don't understand you. The words tumbled out, and then the car was silent again. Julian didn't respond immediately. He was probably trying to maintain his composure. As for me, I felt like I was losing mine. I turned back to the window and for some reason blurted out one more thing. Or maybe you just don't care what happens to me. You should save your attention for someone else." Julian's voice dropped. "Who is someone else?" I bit my lip for a second, but my anger pushed me forward. "Alara. I'm not blind. I saw you at the party." The moment I said it, I knew I had crossed a line. The air in the car seemed to freeze. Julian turned fully towards me, his eyes no longer just cold but dark. It was the look of a man whose pride had been wounded, as if I had just ripped something out of a deeply hidden place. "Say that again." I said. I looked up, meeting his gaze, my anger mixed with a strange hurt. "You should worry about the person you actually care about instead of asking me what I said to your brother." Just as the words left my mouth, the car slowed in front of our building. The moment the driver came to a complete stop, Julian said curtly, "Get out." I got out, my heart still pounding with resentment. We entered the penthouse. The staff saw our expressions and quietly made themselves scarce. The only sounds were the tap of my shoes on the floor and the soft whir of his wheelchair. I was about to head straight to the bedroom when Julian called out, "Stop." I turned back. "What now? You think I was looking at Alara for the reasons you imagine?" "Then tell me." "You never tell me anything, so how am I supposed to know?" I couldn't believe how sharp my own voice sounded. But honestly, when a person is pushed for so long, all it takes is a single match to set them ablaze. I stood before him, my chest heaving, my whole body tense. Julian stared at me, his gaze intense, as if he too was at his limit. "Chloe." It was one of the rare times he used my name. "Don't draw conclusions from a single glance." I laughed bitterly. "Then explain it to me." "I am under no obligation to explain every one of your imaginings." "That's right," I shot back. "What am I to you anyway? An arranged marriage, a wife brought in to play a role, right?" I don't know if it was my words or the culmination of everything that had been building up, but Julian suddenly moved his chair closer. Before I could react, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was so strong it pulled me off balance, and I stumbled forward. And then his mouth was on mine. It was sudden, not gentle, and nothing like I had ever imagined a kiss between a husband and wife would be. It was a kiss of anger, of pride, of a restraint held for so long that the moment it broke, it ignited. His lips pressed hard against mine, as if trying to silence all the words I had just spoken. I froze, my hands instinctively flying to his shoulders. My heart hammered against my ribs, my mind went blank. I meant to push him away, but for a fraction of a second, the heat of his breath and the slight tremor in his body made me hesitate. The moment was brief, but it felt impossibly long. Then, just as suddenly, he let me go. I stumbled back a step, my back hitting the edge of a table, my eyes wide with shock. My lips burned, and my whole body felt like it had been caught in a whirlwind that passed before I could even understand it. Julian sat perfectly still, his chest rising and falling more rapidly than usual. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "From the beginning, you've believed too much of what people say about me." I stood there stunned, not just because of the kiss, but because of his words. From the day we met, he had always called me you, our interactions cold and clearly defined. But in that moment of losing his composure, he had spoken to me directly, intimately. That small change was enough to shift the entire foundation of distance between us. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "You." But I didn't know what to say. Julian was the first to look away, as if he regretted revealing so much. "Go to your room and get some rest." I remained where I was, my mind in turmoil. I was still angry, still hurt, but mixed in with it was a new feeling I didn't dare to name. It made me realize that this man was not as indifferent as he appeared. He just buried everything so deep that when it finally erupted, it was with a force that left me completely defenseless. That night, I went to the bedroom first. The room was the same as always, tidy, quiet, the faint scent of essential oils in the air. I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers lightly touching my lips, my heart in chaos. Outside the glass doors, the terrace was dark, with only a soft light illuminating the tops of the potted trees. I had thought this marriage was just a cold transaction. But after tonight, I could no longer think of it so simply. Because there are some things that once they have happened, you can no longer pretend they didn't. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy head. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julian's face as he pulled me toward him, felt his hot breath on my lips, and heard his hoarse voice. "You've believed too much of what people say about me." My thoughts were a tangled mess. I sat on the edge of the sofa, looking out at the dew-covered terrace. The bedroom was strangely quiet, as if last night had never happened. If my heart wasn't still beating in a way that felt unfamiliar, I might have thought it was all a dream. When I went downstairs, Julian was already at the dining table. White shirt, neat hair, his expression as calm as any other morning. In front of him were a cup of black coffee and a thin stack of documents. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, feeling both awkward and annoyed. How could he be so strange? Last night was a storm, and this morning he was as calm as a placid lake. Seeing me, he glanced up briefly. "Eat breakfast. We're going out at 8:30. I pulled out a chair, trying to keep my voice normal. "Where are we going? You'll see." That same clipped style of answering. I stirred my oatmeal, feeling a mix of frustration and amusement. This man seemed to have no intention of explaining anything to anyone, not even after something as significant as what happened last night. Maria brought over a plate of pastries, glanced at my face, and then quietly withdrew. After a few bites, I asked, "Are we just going to pretend last night didn't happen?" Julian paused, the pen in his hand, hovering over a document. I expected him to evade the question, but he answered directly. "What do you want it to be?" I was speechless for a second. "You could at least clarify things. My actions will speak for me." "What actions?" "Eat. We'll be late." I wanted to slam my bowl down and go back to my room, but after living in this house for a few weeks, I was beginning to learn something. With Julian, the less he said, the more carefully he was planning something. So I forced myself to finish breakfast, my throat dry. At exactly 8:30, a car took us from the penthouse. I thought we were going to my mother's hospital or his office, but instead, the car stopped in front of City Hall. I turned to Julian, my eyes wide. "We're here to get our marriage license," he said simply. I was stunned. The lavish wedding had happened, the reception was over. Everyone in both families knew we were married, and yet we hadn't actually gotten a marriage license until now. A chill ran through me. It felt as if for the past few weeks I had been standing on a loose floorboard that could give way at any moment. Julian looked straight ahead, his voice even. "The wedding was for everyone else to see. This paperwork is what matters when things go wrong." I turned to him. His words were clinical, but that's what made them feel real. No sugarcoating, no comforting lies, just the unvarnished truth. A man like him would never say things like, "to make you feel secure," or, "I want to make it official for you." He would just do it and let you figure it out. We went inside to handle the paperwork. The clerk must have been notified in advance because the process was incredibly fast. I sat there, filling out the form, the pen in my hand, and felt a strange sense of irony. Most people get their license and then get married. I had gotten married, been through a whirlwind of drama, and only now was I signing the paper that legally confirmed I was his wife. When it was time to sign, I paused before the line. The white paper, the red stamp, the blue ink, it was all so ordinary, yet my heart was in turmoil. I signed my name and looked up to see that Julian had already signed his signature, sharp and decisive, just like him. Walking out with the certificate in my hand, I said softly, "You really do think of everything." Julian didn't look at me. It's not about thinking far ahead. It's about thinking ahead. The car didn't take us straight home. Instead, it stopped at a law office near the park. I sat in the waiting area, a new suspicion dawning on me. The marriage license was one thing, but coming to a law office was clearly not a coincidence. As I suspected, Mr. Vincent, the lawyer, was waiting for us. He stood up to greet us, his expression more serious than usual. On the table was a thick binder. "Mr. Julian, Mrs. Croft. This is the finalized prenuptial and spousal rights agreement." I blinked, staring at the stack of papers, unsure how to react. Julian turned to me. "Read it." I flipped through the pages. The more I read, the more a complex feeling washed over me. It stated clearly that if within the first 3 years of our marriage any dispute arose that caused me to leave the marriage through no fault of my own, I would be guaranteed a financial settlement large enough to establish a new life and care for my mother. The figure was $5 million. Furthermore, there was a clause explicitly defining my mother's medical expenses as a voluntary gift from the groom's family, not to be considered a loan or grounds for repayment in the event of a divorce. I looked up sharply. "When did you have this drawn up?" "Before the wedding." "Then, why are you only showing it to me now?" Julian's reply was calm. "Because now is when you need to understand it." I bit my lip, my hand trembling slightly, as I looked at the words, $5 million. The amount was so large that the old me wouldn't have even dared to dream of it. But what stunned me wasn't just the number. It was his foresight. He didn't make vague promises like, "I'll take care of you." He turned everything into black and white, into legally binding clauses, something that could be notarized and taken to court if anyone tried to go back on it. I asked slowly, "Why are you doing this?" Julian looked me straight in the eye. "So that in the future no one can say you married into this family for money and left with nothing." and so that no one can ever use your mother's medical bills to threaten you. Hearing that, a different kind of chill went down my spine. He had thought of that too. He had considered that one day, among the calculating members of the Croft family, someone might use the fact that my mother was indebted to them to hold me hostage. And before that could happen, he had blocked that path. Mr. Vincent pushed another single sheet of paper toward me, a handwritten note with Julian's signature at the bottom. If you would like further assurance, Mr. Julian has agreed to this handwritten codicil, confirming this as an independent financial commitment. You may have it notarized separately at any time. I looked at the paper, then at the man sitting next to me. In that moment, all my misunderstandings about the $500 credit card, about his coldness, began to unravel. This man was truly strange. He wasn't skilled at comforting people with words, but he had built a fortress of protection around me so solid that it would be difficult for anyone to corner me. I asked quietly, "Aren't you afraid? I'll take these papers and walk away." A corner of Julian's mouth twitched. If you were going to do that, you wouldn't be sitting here asking me that question. His answer silenced me completely. Leaving the law office, the sun was high in the sky. I sat in the car, the folder of documents on my lap. The papers didn't make me feel giddy with joy over the money. They made me feel, for the first time since this marriage began, that I wasn't just a pawn being moved between two sides. At least on paper, I had been given a position with clearly defined rights. The car moved slowly past a row of trees. I glanced at Julian's profile and said softly, "Thank you." He didn't turn, just replied, "Don't thank me yet. I'm just doing what needs to be done." I knew that to him, it was just what needed to be done. But to me, it was the first real shield that made me believe that in that house full of traps, I might not always have to stand alone. Not long after leaving the law office, Julian told the driver to head to the main estate. I turned to him. Back to the mansion, Father called for lunch. I hugged the folder to my chest. The brief sense of security I had felt was now weighed down by a familiar heaviness. The Croft family was like that. They give you a guarantee with one hand and pull you back into their tangled web with the other. When we arrived, Richard Croft was already in the living room. He was wearing a light beige shirt, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every bit the benevolent patriarch waiting for his children to join him for a meal. If I hadn't seen that strange look between him and my mother, I might have been reassured by his calm demeanor. I bowed my head. "Hello, Father." He nodded slightly. "Hello. Sit down. It's just a simple family lunch today, no one else is here." Julian moved his wheelchair to his usual spot. I had just sat down when Richard took a jade bracelet from a small wooden box on the table. It was a beautiful milky green color. Even without knowing its value, I knew it was priceless. He placed it in front of me. This was Julian's mother's. "I've kept it safe. Today I'm giving it to you." I was stunned. "Father, I couldn't possibly accept. You're part of the family now." "Don't be a stranger," he said gently. "Keep it as a token from me." I still hesitated. Julian glanced at me and said simply, "If Father is giving it to you, you should accept it." I had no choice but to take it with both hands. The jade felt cool and smooth in my palm. It was beautiful, but for some reason I didn't feel happy. Perhaps because in this house, the more valuable the gift, the more I felt it came with an invisible price tag. Lunch was served shortly after. The meal was elegant and simple: steamed sea bass, a light soup with bamboo shoots, a plate of perfectly green blanched vegetables. Richard Croft spoke slowly, occasionally asking me about my old job, my mother's health, if I was getting used to the new house. On the surface, it was all very pleasant, like a father-in-law trying to create a harmonious atmosphere. But the more he tried, the more tired I felt, because I couldn't tell what was genuine and what was the facade he wanted the world to see. Halfway through the meal, Julian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and said, "I need to take this outside." Richard Croft nodded. "Go ahead." Julian left the table, and a staff member opened the glass doors to the back terrace for him. It was just me and Richard Croft left at the table. The atmosphere immediately shifted. I put down my chopsticks just as he was slowly wiping his mouth with a napkin. He then looked up at me. His gaze was completely different now. It was no longer benevolent or polite. It was the look of a man who had buried many secrets. A look that could chill you to the bone. He asked, his voice still even, "What was your mother's real intention in sending you into this family?" I looked up, my hands tightening in my lap. "Father, I don't understand what you mean." He gave a very faint smile. "You don't understand, or you don't want to understand. I only know that my mother is very ill, and this marriage was agreed upon by both sides. If you have something to say, perhaps you should say it to my mother." Richard Croft let out a small laugh, but there was no warmth in it. "If talking to your mother was enough, you wouldn't be sitting here right now." I looked straight at him. In that moment, I understood clearly. He hadn't brought me into this family simply out of concern for his son. He was looking at me as if I were a direct link to a past he didn't want anyone to touch. Just then, there was a loud crash from the back terrace. I jumped to my feet, and before I could process what was happening, I heard a staff member cry out in alarm. "Mr. Julian, Mr. Julian." I practically threw myself toward the glass doors. On the small ramp connecting the terrace to the stone path in the garden, Julian's wheelchair had slipped sideways. One wheel had gone off the edge, and the whole chair was tilting precariously. He was gripping the wheels, his jaw clenched, trying to keep his balance. Another inch, and both he and the chair would have tumbled down into the flower bed below. My heart was in my throat as I rushed toward him. A nearby gardener also ran over, and together they managed to stabilize the chair before he fell. I knelt beside him, my heart pounding. "Are you okay?" Julian didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the front wheel, his expression strangely cold. I followed his gaze and saw something small and metallic wedged in the wheel's locking mechanism. I used my fingertips to pull it out. It was a short piece of sharpened metal, clearly not something that would have ended up there by accident. I held it out to him. "This..." He stared at the object for a long time, then looked up. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a deep, dark weight. He spoke very softly, but each word was clear. "When you're at the main estate, never ever go anywhere alone." I froze the cold piece of metal still in my hand. All this time I thought the dangers in this house were just gossip and traps meant to humiliate. But I was wrong. Some people had gone much further than I could have imagined so far that even a small garden ramp could be turned into a potential death trap. I turned and looked back at the glass doors. Richard Croft was still standing there, separated from us by a pane of glass. I didn't know what he had seen, or what he was thinking. I only knew that my heart felt like it had been doused with ice water. The deeper I went into the Croft family, the more I realized it wasn't just a house of secrets. It was a place where one wrong step could cost you your life. On the drive back to the penthouse, I barely said a word. The small piece of metal I'd found in Julian's wheelchair was in my pocket, feeling as heavy as a stone. I kept thinking about the look in his eyes when he saw it. It wasn't surprise. It was the look of a man who was used to danger lurking in every corner of his own home. When we arrived, Mr. Vinson, the lawyer, was waiting in the living room. He stood up to greet us, his expression more somber than usual. On the table was a brown file. The moment I sat down, he began. "Mr. Julian, Mrs. Croft. I'm here to review the supplemental documentation regarding Mrs. Eleanor's treatment support." At the mention of my mother, I immediately looked up. "Is there a problem with her file?" Mr. Vinson chose his words carefully. "Not a problem precisely. It's just that as a matter of principle, all expenditures related to the marriage need to be clearly documented. In the future, should any disputes arise, or if there are signs of bad faith in the marital agreement, the paying party reserves the right to review these costs." My hands went cold. It was a veiled threat. He was reminding me that if this marriage went south, the money spent on my mother's treatment could be used as a noose around my neck. They could paint me as a gold digger who married for money, and then use that debt of gratitude to crush me. I looked at Julian. He said nothing, just gave a slight nod to the lawyer and had the housekeeper see him out. The moment the door closed, I shot to my feet. "How long were you going to let me be this naive?" Julian looked up. "Calm down." "How can I be calm?" My voice was shaking. "At the mansion, someone tampers with your wheelchair. We get back here, and a lawyer is waiting to remind me that one day my mother's illness could be used against me. Am I your wife? Or am I a pawn you move around a chessboard?" Julian was silent for a few seconds, then spoke very quietly. "Get changed. I'm taking you out." Half an hour later, we were at a restaurant by the river. It was a quiet place hidden behind a row of weeping willows with soft golden lights reflecting on the water. It was so peaceful, you could hear the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. Julian chose a secluded table and asked the waiter to just bring tea. I sat across from him, my nerves still raw. If he told me not to overthink things, I was going to walk out. He looked at me for a long time, then asked, "Do you remember Sunny Meadows Children's Home?" I froze. The name was a stone thrown into the deep well of my memory. A children's home on the edge of the county, with faded yellow walls and a large sycamore tree in the yard. I had lived there for a short time before Eleanor adopted me. Most of my childhood was a blur, but the name Sunny Meadows remained. My hands tightened on the edge of the table. How do you know that name?" Julian didn't answer right away. He looked down at his tea, his voice deeper than usual. There was a skinny little boy there who was always getting bullied by the older kids. His name was Sam. And there was a little girl named Lily, tiny but fierce. Every time she saw him getting pushed around, she would run over and stand in front of him. One time she got shoved so hard she scraped her knee, but she still wouldn't move. I was speechless. An image flashed in my mind, a corner of an old playground, the sounds of shouting children, a skinny boy clutching a torn backpack, and me back when I was still Lily arguing with bigger kids to protect him. The memory was so old I hadn't thought of it in years, but now the pieces were slowly clicking into place. I stared at Julian, a lump in my throat. You're Sam. Before I was adopted by the Crofts," he said. The sounds of the river faded away. My mind was reeling. The cold, aloof man sitting in front of me was the same fragile little boy from all those years ago. Julian leaned back in his chair, his eyes still on me. "My mother died when I was young. I was put in the home for a while. Then Richard Croft adopted me, gave me a new name, and I lived as part of the family. But you're not always truly family," I whispered. "When did you recognize me? Before the wedding?" "And you didn't say anything." "If I had told you then, you would have been scared," he said bluntly. "You would have thought I was using the past to manipulate you." I bit my lip, my eyes burning. I didn't know whether to be angry or heartbroken. Everything from the beginning suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. The blanket on the wedding night, his silent protection, the prenuptial agreement, the way he always prepared for the worst-case scenario for me. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Julian looked me straight in the eye. "Because I've been looking for you for years." I was stunned again. "When I found out Eleanor was sick and that you were the same Lily, I agreed to the marriage immediately. And the rumors about you, they were convenient rumors that started after my accident," he said, taking a sip of tea. "I let them spread. The fewer women who wanted to marry me, the easier it was to control this situation and find you." Hearing that, I let out a choked laugh, my eyes stinging with tears. "You really do take the long way around." "If I didn't," he said slowly, "I wouldn't have been able to keep you by my side long enough to protect you." That sentence made my heart skip a beat. I sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the river breeze was cool and smelled of the night water. The man before me was still the Julian of the present, cold, reserved, hard to read. But now, superimposed over that image, I also saw the skinny little boy who had once hidden behind me in the playground of a children's home. This marriage hadn't started with tender love. It had started with a long, silent search by a man so secretive, I had almost misunderstood him completely. On the way back from the restaurant, I sat beside Julian, my mind a tangled mess. Knowing he was Sam, knowing he had spent years looking for me, didn't magically erase the hurt I'd felt since the wedding. I was still angry that he'd hidden so much, still pained that I'd been pushed to a point where I thought he saw me as just another chess piece. But amidst the anger, something had shifted. I no longer saw him as a stranger. When we got home, I went quietly up to the bedroom. Julian remained in his study. As I was changing, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Hello." A woman's quiet voice answered. "Chloe. It's Alara. Can you meet me tomorrow just for a moment?" I paused for a few seconds, then replied, "Yes." "Okay." The next afternoon, I went to a small cafe in a quiet side street. Alara was already at a corner table, a nearly empty teacup in front of her. Without makeup, her beautiful face looked tired, just as it had at the party. The moment I sat down, she spoke directly. "I asked you here because there are things you need to know. If I don't say them, you'll misunderstand Julian forever." I listened, not interrupting. Alara looked down, stirring her empty cup. There was never anything romantic between Julian and me. Never. I kept my expression neutral, but my heart stirred. Then the way you two looked at each other. "It was gratitude," she said softly, "and pity. Pity for two people trapped in the same calculating house. When Julian first came back from studying abroad, no one in that family was truly on his side. I was just someone who treated him with basic decency. That's all." Hearing her words, I felt a lump form in my throat. The jealousy that had plagued me at the party was just a distorted perception born of my own suspicion. Alara opened her purse and placed a small silver USB drive on the table. "I've had this for a long time. At first it was for my own protection. Now I think you should have it." I frowned. "What's on it?" Text messages between Kevin and Tim about deleting the camera footage. Some internal emails about a dirty money trail in the company. and she paused, her eyes darkening an old audio recording. Kevin was drunk once and let it slip. About Julian's accident. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying... I can't be 100% sure, Alara said, her fingers tightening around her cup. But I believe that accident was no accident. I looked at the USB drive, my hand feeling heavy. Every time I thought I had reached the bottom of the Croft family's depravity, someone pulled back another curtain to reveal an even filthier layer. Alara looked up at me, her voice urgent for the first time. Chloe, you have to be careful. Kevin is not like Tiffany. Tiffany makes a scene because she's immature. Kevin is the type to smile while he's pushing you underwater. I asked quietly, why are you helping me? A bitter smile touched her lips, her eyes full of exhaustion. Because I've stood beside him for too long. I've only just realized that silence in the face of evil is a form of complicity. I took the USB drive and put it in my bag. As I stood up to leave, Alara added one more thing. If you ever feel overwhelmed, just remember this. Julian has never been an outsider in your life. He's always been there. But life doesn't let you catch your breath. As soon as I got back to the penthouse, my phone blew up with notifications. One of the aunts had posted several photos to the family group chat from the party. They were photos of me and Kevin in that side room, cropped so tightly that it looked like we were standing intimately close. The caption was dripping with insinuation. The new daughter-in-law seems to be getting a lot of attention from the older brother. Youth and beauty certainly have their advantages. My blood boiled. The photos weren't fake, but they were deliberately framed. Anyone who didn't know the context would immediately assume the worst. A woman's reputation, especially a new wife's, could be destroyed by a few pictures like that. I gripped my phone until my knuckles turned white. Julian came out of his study and knew from my face that something was wrong. He took my phone, scrolled through the messages, and his expression hardened. I knew he would try this. I laughed on the verge of tears. You knew and you still let him, because photos can be denied, he said, looking straight at me. But if you have the original unedited security footage from the hallway leading to that room, he has nothing to say. He opened his laptop and accessed a private server. The full video file appeared on the screen. I saw it all clearly, Kevin calling me over the way he blocked my path and then Julian's arrival. Not a single frame was missing. There was no ambiguity, nothing like the cropped photos suggested. I sank onto the sofa, my chest tight. So you never suspected me? Julian turned to me, his voice low and firm. I never did. Just those 3 words. All the resentment I'd been holding inside suddenly welled up hot and overwhelming. For the first time since entering the Croft family, I didn't feel like I had to fight alone. Someone was on my side, not with noise or promises, but with quiet, solid action. I looked at him and asked slowly, "What are you going to do now?" Julian closed his laptop. "It's not time to show all our cards. But from now on, anything they aim at you, I will collect the proof." He called me you in the intimate way again, naturally, this time no longer a slip of the tongue in anger. Hearing it, my heart felt a mix of sorrow and warmth. Just then, my phone rang again. It was the hospital. I answered, and by the time I hung up, my face was pale. My mother had been readmitted. That night, when Julian and I arrived at the hospital, Eleanor was lying in bed, looking even thinner than before. Her lips were pale, her breathing labored. The moment she saw me, she gripped my hand, her eyes filled with a strange intensity that made my heart clench. It wasn't the look of a sick person worried about her health. It was the look of someone who had made a final, resolute decision. She looked at Julian for a long time, her voice raspy. "You remember your promise to me." I turned about to ask what she meant, but she closed her eyes as if exhausted, her hands still holding mine tight and trembling. In that instant, I had a terrible premonition. My mother was about to make the final move in the game of her life. Richard Croft's birthday party took place exactly 1 week after my mother was hospitalized. The Croft family tried to maintain a facade of harmony, as if bright lights, a lavish feast, and a chorus of congratulations could patch up all the cracks in their foundation. But I knew that beneath the glittering surface everyone was as tense as a drawn bowstring. I followed Julian into the grand ballroom, my heart heavy as a stone. I had felt uneasy all day. My mother in the hospital had just held my hand and said one thing: "When the time comes to reveal the truth, you cannot be soft-hearted, my child." I didn't understand her full meaning then. It was only when the party was in full swing amidst the toasts and laughter that a commotion erupted at the main entrance. That's when I understood how heavy her words had been. My mother Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a simple worn brown dress, her body so thin that the fabric seemed to hang on her bones. Her steps were slow but steady, as she walked into a hall filled with silk jewels and perfume. Her presence was a stark, painful contrast. The entire room fell silent. The moment Richard Croft saw her, he froze, the color draining from his face. I rushed to her side. "Mom, you're sick. Why are you here?" She just squeezed my hand once, and then let it go, her eyes frighteningly intense. It was no longer the gaze of a frail, sick mother. It was the gaze of someone who had carried a burden for too long and had decided at any cost to finally set it down. She looked straight at Richard Croft, her voice hoarse but every word clear. "Today, in front of your entire family, I will say it all, so that no one can ever hide their rotten core behind a mask of decency again." The hall was frozen. Richard took a step forward, his voice strained. "Eleanor, what are you talking about?" My mother let out a laugh that sounded more painful than a sob. "I'm talking about the death of Harrison Croft all those years ago." At the mention of that name, the older relatives exchanged panicked looks. Harrison was Richard Croft's firstborn son, who had died many years ago. The official story was that he had fallen into the lake behind the estate after a night of drinking. My mother pointed a trembling finger at Richard. "You told the world it was an accident." "But it wasn't. I killed him." A collective gasp swept through the room. I stood there, frozen my feet, feeling like they were nailed to the floor. I knew my mother was hiding a terrible secret, but I had never imagined it was this monstrous. Richard Croft stumbled, grabbing the back of a chair for support. You're insane." "Insane," my mother rasped, her eyes bloodshot. "I went insane the day I saw your precious son try to assault my daughter when she was just a little girl who knew nothing." My entire body went cold. The sounds in the ballroom seemed to disappear. All I could hear was the frantic beating of my own heart. My mother gasped for breath, a hand clutching her chest, but she pushed on. That day, if I had been one step slower, her life would have been ruined. I pushed him, he fell, and his head hit the stone steps. I thought he was just unconscious, but he died. I hid the truth, and you hid it right along with me to protect the precious Croft family name. Richard's voice trembled. "Be quiet. For God's sake, be quiet." "No," my mother screamed, the force of it triggering a violent coughing fit. "I've been quiet for decades. I let my daughter grow up in fear, let her walk into this very house not knowing she was walking into a den of wolves. Today I speak it all so that those who are guilty will finally bear their sins." The police were called. There was nothing anyone could do to stop it. My mother didn't resist. She just turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a pain so deep I couldn't bear it. I sank to my knees beside her, tears streaming down my face. "Mom, why? Why didn't you tell me?" She stroked my hair, her hand trembling, her voice now a whisper. "Because I wanted you to live a normal life, even if it was just for a few years." Those were the last coherent words she spoke to me before she was taken away on a stretcher under police guard. The shock had triggered a massive decline. Her old illness came roaring back. Just 3 days later, the hospital informed me that the cancer had reached its final stage. Her heart was failing. She passed away quickly, like a candle that had long run out of wax, just waiting for that one final gust of wind to be extinguished. After the funeral, I found a letter folded in her pocket. The handwriting was shaky but clear. She hadn't married me off for money. She did it because she knew Julian was Sam, the boy from the children's home, and she knew he had been searching for me. She wrote that she had sinned, but she did not regret saving her daughter. I wept as I read it. My mother was not a perfect woman, but until her last breath, she had shielded me in the most painful way possible. The scandal destroyed Richard Croft. He didn't die immediately. He withered, shrinking into himself over a few weeks, locking himself in his study. The old case was reopened, the family was in chaos. Then one morning he passed away in his sleep. Outsiders said he went peacefully, but we knew it was the death of a man who had built his life on power, but in the end couldn't preserve the most basic decency for his own family. The reading of the will took place not long after. Kevin sat confidently as if the inheritance was his by right. But when Mr. Vinson finished reading the main clauses, the room exploded. The vast majority of the company's shares, controlling interest, and primary assets were left to Julian. Kevin shot to his feet. "That's impossible. I'm the eldest son," Mr. Vinson calmly opened another envelope. "As per Mr. Croft's final directive, I am to also announce the results of a DNA test. Mr. Kevin, you are not his biological son." The blood drained from Kevin's face. Before he could even process the shock, he was hit with another blow. Julian forwarded the entire dossier, the incriminating emails, the evidence of financial fraud, the unedited security footage, the cropped photos used to slander me, and the audio recording of Kevin talking about the accident to the Yemens. Authorities. I didn't need to see a trial to know his fate. The look on his face, shifting from arrogance to pure panic, was enough. The wicked are always punished. It was just a matter of time. Things finally settled on a cool autumn afternoon. Julian and I went to the cemetery to visit my mother and Richard Croft. Their graves were not far from each other, a tragic irony. A lifetime of misguided love, betrayal, and secrets, and in the end, they rested under the same sky. I asked him quietly, "Do you still hate your father?" Julian was silent for a long time. "I used to. Now I just think he was a pitiful man." I leaned my head on his shoulder. The wind whispered through the grounds, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass. After walking through a lifetime of tragedy, what was left between us was no longer a transactional marriage, but two people who had been lost to each other as children, and against all odds, had found their way back. Julian took my hand, his voice very soft. "I don't need any more contracts. I just need you to stay." I looked at him and nodded. Some homes are built on money, power, and reputation, but they can collapse with the revelation of a single secret. Other homes begin in a storm of tears and wounds, yet somehow become the one place you want to return to. The lesson I learned through it all is that you can never judge a person by their outward appearance, and you must never ever trade your self-respect, not even in the face of the greatest adversity. Evil may have its day, but the truth, like a needle in a haystack, will eventually be found, and when judgment comes, no one can escape it.